Hi, I'm Eddie, aka a disabled dude doing disabled things. So yeah, you can call me Eddie. Um, if you're new, which you definitely are, hit that like button, smash that subscribe button. That's what they say, right? So yeah, do that. And by the way, my other hand's busy because I'm holding this cat toy. He's gonna meow if I don't play constantly. Anyway, so I'm reacting today to the thing of TBI's overview of traumatic brain injury, TBI, and that's what I have. So it's like near to my heart. So I mean, I know about TBIs, I know about what I have, but maybe it's something I won't know. Who knows? Let's see.
Complex world of traumatic brain
Oh,
injury.
Mr.
And this lesson here is going to be a lesson that's near and dear to my
Oh,
heart for
me
a
too.
few different
Me
reasons,
too.
and that is to talk about the complex world of traumatic brain injury. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about with this topic, so make sure you guys hang in there, and I'm going to start breaking this down with an overview.
Yeah. Yup.
All right, you guys, welcome back. Let's go ahead and get started with this lesson here today on traumatic brain injury. And my name is Eddie Watson, and this is ICU Advantage.
Eddie
And my goal
Watson.
here with ICU Advantage is to take these complex critical care topics and really break them down and make them easy to understand for you guys. I really hope that I'm able to do just that. And if I have, hopefully by the end of this lesson, I'll have earned a subscription from you. If you
Yeah.
do, make sure you hit that bell
Maybe.
icon and
I'll see. Maybe I'll subscribe if I get it. If he says something interesting.
all notifications. That way you'll never miss out as soon as I release a new lesson. All right, so let's go ahead and start off talking about traumatic brain injury, or something that we refer to as TBI. And so, what this is essentially when we have some sort of external force that's going to be causing damage to the
Oh.
brain.
It's
And this
only
can really be the
I thought it was internal causes too, like seizures. I mean, sorry. Like strokes or what's it called? What are those things? Yeah, strokes. Like strokes. So I don't know. We'll see.
result of many different types of forces. So, things from mechanical, thermal, chemical, electrical, even radiation can technically cause damage to the brain.
Mine was mechanical car crash. Bam, wham.
But more
Thank you, ma'am.
often, when we're talking about this, we're referring to the physical, mechanical forces. These are going to be the most common type. And so, our attention has really been brought to TBI over the last decade or so, primarily as a result of some of the sports related injuries, most notably the big NFL controversy, as well as TBI amongst our military, given the
My phone just went off. Who is it? What do they want? Napkins. Chill. Chill, honey. No one report. Just as I stopped playing with him.
wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and seeing higher rates of TBI as a result. And so, because of these, we've learned quite a lot in regards to this injury. Now, unfortunately, TBI is a very
It
common thing.
sucks. It sucks that it took like sports injuries in order to make TBI, put TBI on the map, because it is prevalent. It's one of the most prevalent illnesses, maladies there is.
In fact, the CDC estimates that we have 2.5 million traumatic brain injuries that occur every year
That's a
in the
lot.
US alone. And
That's a lot
TBI
of
is a
energy.
major cause of our preventable death and disability within the United States. And in fact, it makes up over 30% of all the injury related deaths. And really, we estimate that there's probably 50,000
I did die for a few minutes, but then I came back. Back in black. Mana.
plus deaths per year as a result of this, and half of those are actually dying within the initial 2 hours after the injury. All right, so
That
with that
sucks.
said, let's take a quick look at the etiology of this particular brain injury. As I said, all of this is a result of the
Smoke out of my. God damn.
those external forces really being transferred to the brain tissue. So I'm going to take you guys back a little bit.
Oh, what is it?
Brain injury. As I said, all of this is a result of those external forces really being transferred to the brain tissue. So I'm going to.
But I was sure that a stroke leaves you with the TBI or can leave you with the TBI. Because my neurology ward, when I was inpatient, lots of people with strokes, and same with TBI group that I went to for a bit.
Take you guys back a little bit to high school physics, and if you remember, we have our equation: force equals mass times
Fuck high school physics. Yo, this one time I was friends with this overachieving smart kid. He's awesome. So he was in my physics class, and we had test that day. It's the only test I studied for like ever. I mean, it's not true, but it's one of the only tests I actually studied for. And I called my friend. I'm like, did you get this answer for this study quiz? Cause the test is tomorrow. And he goes, what? The test is tomorrow? Oh shit. So whatever, it's tomorrow. And I got a 30 on the test. He got 104. He's a good kid, and I like the kid. Back to this.
acceleration. And so logically, we just know that the force that's going to be exerted is going to partially be dependent on the size of the particular object, as well as the acceleration or the speed, or sometimes even deceleration in some of our injuries, the speed that something is going. And ultimately, the impact that these forces have are going to be dependent on factors such as the amount of the force, the direction of that force, the duration of the force, as well as the rate and other things like that. And so knowing that we have these different factors that are going to play into the impact of this force, this actually leads pretty nicely into talking about our mechanisms of injury. Now, before I get started here, I really am interested to see what you guys know about this. So head down in the comments below, let me know some examples of different mechanisms of injury that really.
I mean, there are lots. There's some car crashes. There's army, like military causes. There's sports. But there's anything. There's like, you can slip and fall and get a TBI. Car crashes all the time. So prevalent. I don't know, man. There's so many.
You guys can think of. Like I said, I'm truly interested to see what you guys know, and then afterwards, let's go ahead and compare answers. All right, so hopefully you took the time to head down there and leave that comment. So let's go ahead and talk about these mechanisms of injury. And there's really two different major types of mechanisms of injury. The first is going to be what we call blunt injury, and the other is going to be penetrating. So first, let's actually talk about our penetrating injuries.
Blunts when like something hits you, or something like hits you and slaps you, not goes through your head. Like, and penetrating is what goes through your head and penetrates your brain. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think I'm right.
So
I'm pretty sure I'm right.
this is going to result when an object actually has penetrated the skull. And these penetrating injuries are most commonly caused by guns, which are our number one most common cause.
I know a guy that was shot in the head. He's fine though, oddly enough. He's not fine, but he's fine enough. Like me, but I think, I don't want to say worse off, but he has some, whatever.
And this includes both high and low velocity, which will actually have some importance here in
Issues. He has some issues. That's a good word.
just a minute, as well as high and low, number one most common cause. And this includes both high and low velocity, which will actually have some importance here in just a minute, as well as knives and then other penetrating objects. And these other penetrating objects can really be a whole wide variety of things. I mean, I've seen things from big, long pieces of rebar that have caused injury. I've seen things from rocks being kicked up from a lawnmower, as well as I've even seen things as crazy as like a machete. Although I guess that technically could be classified.
Sorry.
Plus, I've even seen things as crazy as like a machete. Although I guess that technically could be classified as a knife. So again, the key takeaway here is the object is going to penetrate the skull, causing.
I'm holding it, John, like I'm fucking English, like not in royalty. I'm like, yes, yes. How will I hit this, John? Napkins, what do you want? You wanna play? Yes, you do. Back to this.
Injury to the brain. And so now let's talk about these blunt injuries. And so when we talk about these are really going to.
Blunt injuries, that's where it's at. Maybe I smoked too much weed. I gotta cut down or stop. No, I think weed's important. Like a knife, because we have marijuana receptors, the cannabinoid receptors. So it plays a role in life. But overdoing it like I do, that's the bad idea. That's where it comes. Like, that becomes a negative. Like, I remember when I first started smoking again after the accident. It was like 2.5 years. And, what do you oh, and 2.5 years and after the accident, and I started smoking again, and I sounded way worse then. So I just like went to speech therapy, but I started smoking, and I sounded better. Like they were like, "Oh, what'd you do? You sound great today." I'm like, "I smoked," but then I started smoking too much, and I got kicked out of speech therapy. Anyway.
Going to be resulting from one of the following 6 reasons. We have our acceleration injury, which is when a moving object makes contact with the head, and this is going to cause acceleration of the head. So here, think baseball bat hitting a head. The next is going to be our deceleration, and so this is where we have a moving head that strikes a stationary object. So here, think of someone who's fallen off a ladder and then hits their head in the process.
It seems too elementary, my dear Watson.
We also have something that we call acceleration deceleration. And so this is where the brain quickly goes from rest to moving and then back to rest again. And this is really most commonly seen in our motor vehicle accidents. We also have what we call rotation injury, and this is going to be twisting of the brain inside of the skull. This is most commonly caused by some sort of side impact to the head. And then finally, apparently I can't count, this is number 5. Finally, we have our compression or deformation. And this is really where we have a change in the shape of the skull that's ultimately causing injury to the brain tissue. And I think this one's.
God, it's gotta suck. Yo, all this suck. Brain injuries are forever. This is forever. This shit is forever. But like sometimes I seem fine-ish, but other times I know. But I tried. Excuse me. I think the 2 things that saved me were at the beginning when I was impatient. I read a book. It was the Angels and Demons. Angels and Demons. I read Angels and Demons. And I remember I had I'm glad I read that because it came back to life a little after reading. But I haven't read a book in 5 years, 6 years. No. But I don't know. Weed was another thing. Like it helped socially a lot. A lot, a lot. But once again, overdoing it.
Pretty self-explanatory here. All right, and so next I want to talk about the different ways in which we classify these brain injuries. And we can really classify these injuries one of 2 ways. The first is based on the severity, and then the other is going to be based on the.
Mine's severe. Severe.
Pathological features that present. And so if we talk about the severity scale, this is where we're going to see 3 different severity levels. We have.
Oh, and what's it called? Concussions are partially. Concussions are called TBIs, mild TBIs, because that's also part of TBI. And I met this girl All she had was a concussion. She was way worse off than me. Like, way worse off. But she was also like on meth or whatever. I don't want to know her. I hung out with her once. Her and her boyfriend did not meth. I don't know, hard, whatever that is. I forget. Maybe it was meth. I don't know. They did meth in my bathroom, and I freaked out on them. Like, cause I was like, "What are you doing in there so long?" And he came in the bathroom. I'm like, "Yo, what are you doing?" And then their friend was on the phone. Like they left their on speakerphone while they went to the bathroom to do their whatever. And she goes, "Where'd they go?" I'm like, "They're both in the bathroom. What the fuck?" And she goes, "Oh, they told me they had no smoke." And I'm like, "Oh, I have plenty of weed." And she goes, "No, hard." I'm like, "What's hard?" And she's like, "Meth, I think." But yo, so I bugged out on them. I bugged out on them. I was like a Dolph bugged out. I was like, "You listen in, Chad," and not really. But I wasn't a freak out. It wasn't like a Darren freak out. It was more of a controlled freak out. Back to this.
What we call mild, moderate, and severe. And the
Severe
way that we really
pub.
grade somebody based on this score is there's a couple different things that we can look at, but the most common of these is going to be to use what we call the Glasgow Coma Scale as our primary assessment tool for classifying this severity of TBI. Now, if you're wondering what the Glasgow Coma Scale is, and you haven't already watched my video that I've already put together,
I heard of that, and I swear to God, as soon as I hear it again, I'll be like, "Oh yeah, that."
on this, I'm actually going to link to that right here, right up above, and head on over and watch that video right now. That
No.
way you'll really understand what I'm talking about
Make me punk. What?
with this assessment. And so the big takeaway here is
What?
the higher GCS score that we have is that's actually going to be associated with better outcomes for our patients. But don't discount the effects of even a mild traumatic brain injury, because even this
I'm saying.
injury can potentially last a lifetime. Although the majority of people that do have this mild injury will fully recover within just a few weeks. All right, so now if we actually talk about the pathological
Not fully recovered. It's part of their brain still affected,
features
but I guess much more easily recoverable than like severe.
as a classification, there's two different types when it comes to classifying this way. And the first of these is what we call focal, and this is where we're going to be producing symptoms that are related to functions of the specific damaged areas. So you can almost think about this as being localized. Now, these particular focal injuries do take up space in the skull, and they ultimately can cause.
I need to get this now, Pi. Focal. Symptoms related to the functions of areas damaged. Okay, okay. So like, okay, so my temporal lobe was like damaged, so that's what was removed, my temporal lobe, a part of my temporal lobe, or the whole. I don't know. I don't know, man.
Compression of the surrounding tissue, leading to edema, elevated ICPs, brain shifts, and even herniation.
Elevated insane clan passes. Oh, that's free one.
To edema, elevated ICP.
That's funny. I know a kid named. I say kid, but I know a guy named Dima. So it's like it's just a Dima. I'm like, hey, I'm one of him. And also ICP, insane clan passive.
Compression of the surrounding tissue, leading to edema, elevated ICPs.
ICP's mad high. I don't really like ICP. Well, it's not that I don't like him, it's just that I never really listened to them.
Brain shifts, and even herniation. So just because they're focal or localized doesn't mean that they can't have an effect on the entire brain. Now, the other classification here is something that we call diffuse, and this is, as the name suggests, it's a widespread injury, often with very little apparent damage on imaging studies. Now, with these injuries, you certainly can have
I think mine was focal. I'm pretty sure it was focal.
either or, but more common is you're actually going to see both of these in our patients. All right, so let's go ahead and move on from here. And I'm going to talk real quickly about something that we call head injury. This is basically a more broad term and technically does encompass the brain injury that we're going to talk about here in a minute. But things that we also consider a head injury that we don't consider brain injury are going to be things like a scalp injury and our skull fractures. Now, for a scalp injury, this is where we're going to have things like an abrasion, which is going to be that top layer of skin that's removed with maybe a little bit of bleeding, to a contusion, which is the skin isn't broken and we have a hematoma, and then finally a laceration, in which we have the scalp, which is actually torn. Now, the scalp is well supplied.
It's a ketchup. I mean, it's a ketchup. So, abrasion, top layer of skin while bleeding. Okay, no, contusions, hematoma. So I think I had a contusion. No, wait, no, not a contusion. Wait, did I? Yeah, contusion. Probably.
With blood, so if you do see a scalp,
Because I banged my head on when I stopped, when I crashed, or see, I'm shaking guard.
scalp laceration, you truly might have extensive bleeding and is probably going to require some sort of suturing. Now, when it comes to skull fractures, there's actually four, and I believe I can count this time. There's four different skull fractures that we're going to talk about. The first is going to be our linear fracture, where this is essentially just a single fracture line or a crack in the bone. So next is going to be our comminuted. This is basically splintered and shattered into pieces. Next is going to be the depressed skull fracture, which actually goes in line with what we had talked about previously with the mechanism of injury being that compression or deformation. So in the depressed skull fracture, we're going to have bone fragments that become inwardly depressed into the brain tissue. And this can either be open or closed. And then
I have no idea which one.
finally, the last fracture is going to be something that we call the basilar, which is essentially a linear fracture along the base of the skull.
So, linear stuff fraction. I'm sorry, my voice is like something's in it. There's a frog in my throat, and it won't fucking die. Alright, so linear single. Oh, that was creepy. I don't mean to be creepy. I just have, like, I don't know. You'll see. I don't know. I just say shit that I think is funny at the time, but then I realize it could not be funny, and then it get all awkward. Cut that out. So let's go for it. Alright. Linear single fracture line or crack. I don't think so. Committed, splintered, shattered, depressed. Maybe I had depressed. Maybe I had depressed the thing. I don't know.
Now, our basal skull fracture, this is where you're going to see some of these classic signs like our periorbital ecchymosis, or something we call raccoon eyes, the mastoid ecchymosis or battle sign. You can also have a dural tear resulting in either rhinorrhea, which is CSF or blood from the nose, or otorrhea, which is CSF or blood from the ears, as well as the hemotympanum, which is where we have blood in the tympanic cavity behind that tympanic membrane. All right, so with those out of the way,
I'm just ignoring this shit because I have no idea what he's talking about. He's speaking a foreign language, bro. Speaking a foreign language, bro. I can't roll my R's, but I can roll them like in short bursts. Burst. Burst. I can't do it. I can only do bro. Come on, bro. Bra. A Russian gangster.
let's actually get in and start to talk about our brain injuries, and specifically something that we refer to as our primary brain injury. Now, this is going to be a really quick overview, as I'm actually going to have another lesson coming up here where I'm going to cover this stuff in much
How
more
long is
depth.
this?
But our primary brain injury is going to be something that occurs at the
No,
time of the
8 more
impact,
minutes.
and the result is either a focal, diffuse, or combination of the two injury. There's actually 7 different types of primary brain injury that I'm going to talk about. So the first and the least severe is going to be our concussion. And this is essentially our mildest form. Really, this is considered a diffuse injury. And someone with a concussion can often have a
I'm like catching up. I shouldn't have smoked. Well, I mean, who cares? But I'm catching up right now. Like my vision's semi blurry. I don't. I'm smiling a lot, so I gotta chill. Hold on. I gotta catch up. Occurs so I don't have concussion and much more.
brief loss of consciousness, a headache, dizziness, and possibly nausea and vomiting. All right, next is going to be
Nevada. Nevada's short for nausea and vomiting. That makes sense. I'm kidding. Yeah, I've been to Nirvana once, but maybe it makes sense.
something that we call a contusion. This is where we're going to have small bleeds or bruising in the brain tissue. Now, this is where we can start to see
In
things
the
like
brain
coup versus
tissue.
counter coup, which is
In
essentially
brain tissue, I miss you already, but I miss you, I kiss you now. Whatever. Oh, sorry about that.
seeing injury on the same, which is coup, or the opposite side, which is counter coup of the impact.
Q.
Symptoms that you can see with this are going to be changes in our patient's level of consciousness. You can have central nervous system dysfunction, seizures, hemiparesis, hemiplegia, really kind of dependent on where.
See, it's a lot of end results, but it's only for like the lightest of. Oh, no, it's not. No. Oh, never mind. I'm just confusing myself.
This particular focal injury is occurring. All right, the next injury that I'm going to talk about is something that we call epidural hematoma. And this is where we have bleeding between the dura mater and the skull. And this one's often associated with skull fractures. Now, the epidural hematomas are usually the result of an.
I'm not gonna guess anymore because all these words sound familiar, and I don't know if I have which ones happened to me. But I know I had a combination of a bunch. And also, these sound effects are too fun. Dirt. Like, I like that kind of shit when I'm high. I don't know why. No, no, baby. Baby. No, we gotta come here if you wanna. Come on. He's playfully biting on a play. Is that what you're doing? Where's your tongue? Hold on. I'm not like tied, my thing untied. So I'm trying not to like be too exposed. There.
Arterial bleed, most associated with the middle meningeal.
What was that?
Usually the result of an arterial skull fractures.
Okay.
Now, the epidural hematomas are usually the result of an arterial bleed, most associated with the middle meningeal artery that's located right under the temporal bone. But
yeah,
sort of our classic
now I'm spacing out kind of because now I have no idea what he's talking about. That's what I did in school. I'm sure I can gather some of what he's talking about, or like I can even look stuff up if I'm interested. Because I don't know, if I was interested in this, I would understand it more. But the fact that I'm not, it just makes this a foreign language to me.
presentation.
English, when I was like a little kid, a wee lad, English, I think, seemed like I wanted to learn it, therefore it became more knowable. But if I don't want to know like a language, like this, or like, I don't know, Greek, nothing against Greek, it's just random, like, language that came to mind. I like Bushman. That's Bushman, like they speak using clicks and sounds. Anyway, back to this because I forgot what I was saying. Oh yeah, so like if I wanted to learn this, I probably would, but fuck, I don't give a shit.
For this, and certainly not everybody goes through this, is you may see somebody who presented with an initial loss of consciousness, but then regained consciousness for this period of time, something that we call the lucid period, followed by a pretty rapid decline in their condition. And
Damn.
that rapid decline is really a result of that fast bleeding hematoma since it's an arterial bleed. Now, again, some of the symptoms that we can see for this are again changes in our patient's level of consciousness, headache, seizure, vomiting, and then again, focal changes. And in particular, we could see ipsilateral pupil dilation. So here, this hematoma is putting pressure on the brain tissue, causing this mass effect.
See, I know some of this, but I have like I don't know, a lot of shit wrong in my head. And also my cat's just sitting there staring at the toy. He likes doing that kind of shit. Sitting and staring. But he wants someone to have something worth staring at. His favorite toy. Back to this.
And elevating our patient's ICP. And in almost all cases,
Insane plan posse. Elevating your patient's insane plan posse. Because, they need to get, like, the fix of ICP, I guess. If they're, like, if they gotta induce vomiting, I don't know. Or if you gotta, I don't know, there's something good too. I said induce vomiting, but I didn't mean to insult them. I just meant that, like, as a thing. Alright, hold on, back to this.
this is going to require emergent surgery for this hematoma. All right, so now let's talk about a subdural hematoma. And this is where we're going to see bleeding that's between the dura mater and the arachnoid mater. Now, the subdural hematoma is going to be a little bit different because this is going to be the result of shearing of these cortical veins that kind of bridge between the dura and the arachnoid.
Dura?
So typically these are going to be the result of an
I thought this was basic at first. I was like, alright, this is gonna be whatever. I know it all. How can it be? But it's 19 minutes of, like, it's like 10 minutes of basic stuff everyone knows, and then, well, not everyone, but like 10 minutes of basic shit, and like fucking 10 minutes of, I don't know, science language world. My brother probably knows what this is, means all of it. He definitely knows, but, you know, back to it.
acceleration, deceleration, or some sort of rotational injury. So if you think about it here, now we're actually dealing with a venous bleed as opposed to that arterial bleed. Now, essentially, we're going to classify these as either acute versus subacute and chronic based on if symptoms are going to be present within the first 4.
Oh, what a cute the chronic. I like medical terms. They make fun sound effects. I like sound effects. They're kind of food, food. Like just saying shit in different voices. Voices. It's food.
48 hours. Most often, these are going to occur a lot sooner than that. Now, here in these patients, we're going to see this progressive decline in their level of consciousness. They could have a headache, agitation, confusion, seizures, and once again, focal deficits depending on where the bleed is. And again, here, think the symptoms are usually going to develop slowly as a result of that slower venous bleed. Now, again, depending on the impact that this is having on our patient, that this could also require potentially emergent surgery or at a minimum some sort of drain placement. All right, so the next bleed that I'm going to talk about here is something that we call the traumatic subarachnoid hemorrhage. And this is where we're going to have bleeding that's below.
I had a hemorrhage. Then the impact was on my right side with the temporal lobe and everything, and then I had a seizure hemorrhage on my left side. but I don't know what that affected. But that made my like right hand kind of shake and weak. My right leg semi slightly drags ever so slightly, and but I practiced, like I had to relearn how to walk. So I remember I was like out of the wheelchair and falling like on the walls and shit. But I don't know. Anyway,
The subarachnoid membrane in the subarachnoid space, but it's still outside of the brain tissue. Now, this is actually going to be pathologically different than a subarachnoid hemorrhage that we see as a result of
fucking spiders, arachnoid, like science deals with spiders.
an aneurysm rupture.
It does. Science only deals with spiders. Some subarachnoid makes it creates like people. One day in the future, somebody creates subarachnoids. Traumatic subarachnoid. Rewind.
Different than a subarachnoid hemorrhage that we see as a result of an aneurysm rupture. And in the case of these traumatic ones, there often isn't any surgical intervention that can be done. Now, if we do see a decreased level of conscious in our trauma patients, that this is actually going to be associated with a poor prognosis. And given the nature of the space in which this bleeding is,
they thought I would die. Doctors didn't think I would make it at all. But they told my family like I'd be a vegetable if I survived. I mean, I guess they gotta tell their patients like something to not to expect anything. Sorry, not to expect anything, but it makes sense. But also, I'm glad I survived. Like, I'm glad I'm not a vegetable either way. Like, when I'm mad and I think, like, man, I should have been fucking dead or whatever. But, I don't know. I'm glad I'm not. Curiosity keeps me going. I want to see where this world will go. Like, so curious about that.
is that this may also present itself with an intraventricular hemorrhage as well. Now, for these patients, the symptoms that we're going to see are changes in level of consciousness, a headache, which is often described as the worst headache of their life, confusion, seizures, and once again, focal deficits. All right, and the next bleed that I'm going to talk about is something that we call our intracerebral hemorrhage. And this is where we have bleeding in the actual parenchymal tissue of the brain. Now, this bleeding can occur in a lot of different places throughout the brain.
I'm pretty sure that's the kind of head. Pretty sure. Don't quote me on that. Not 100%. I'm pretty sure.
Depending where the particular vessel is that's injured. But it's important to know that this is not to be confused with.
All I know is my injuries look super, super, super fucking bad. But I don't know what. I'm pretty sure I have that. It's hemorrhage. Hemorrhage. That's French too. Hemorrhage. Oui, oui. Hemorrhage.
The intraparenchymal hemorrhage, or IPH, which is the result of a non-traumatic bleed inside the parenchyma. Now, this bleed is usually associated with severe acceleration, deceleration injuries or penetrating injuries. And the symptoms that we'll see here with this is, once again, changes.
Let's see if he begs me to play again.
In our level of consciousness, headache, vocal deficits, as well as an elevated ICP. All right, and then finally, the last injury that I want to talk about is something that we call our diffuse injury. And this is really something that exists on a continuum of severity, from concussion being our least severe diffuse injury, all the way up to something that we call diffuse axonal injury, or DAI. And essentially, in the case of DAI, this is where we just have this diffuse injury, this diffuse shearing of these axons. And then these patients are going to present with the loss of consciousness and coma and abnormal posturing. And again, as I had mentioned earlier, oftentimes these are going to appear normal on the CT, and if anything, you just might see this diffuse edema as a result. So our patient's prognosis is really going to be based on the severity of this injury, although for our really severe cases, the prognosis is really poor. All right, so those are different types of primary brain injuries. Next, I want to just move on and talk about, real quickly, something that we call our secondary brain injury. Now, again, this is going to be a very quick overview as a
secondary brain injury, like the brain injury's family, second, whatever. You know what I'm trying to say. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Hey, napkins.
Again, I'm going to do another lesson specifically looking at these secondary brain injuries more in depth, really when I'm talking about the management of brain injury. But essentially, the secondary brain injury is a continuation of damage to the brain that is as a result of physiological effects from the primary brain injury. And so basically what's happening here is the primary brain injury is going to lead to this cascade of ischemia and cellular level changes that are going to lead to additional neuron cell injury and ultimately cell death. And some of the major contributors to this are going to be things like hypoxemia, hypotension, anemia, increased intracranial pressures,
I wasn't paying attention to that at all.
To this cellular level of physiological.
Wasn't paying attention to that at all. Oh, let me rewind. I'm sorry about that.
But essentially, the secondary brain injury is a continuation of damage to the brain that is as a result of physiological effects from the primary brain injury. And so basically what's happening here is the primary brain injury is going to lead to this cascade of ischemia and cellular level changes that are going to lead to additional neuron cell injury and ultimately cell death. And some of the major contributors to this are going to be things like hypoxemia, hypotension, anemia, increased intracranial pressures, impaired autoregulation, either hypo or hypercapnia, same thing, either hypo or hyperglycemia, various biochemical changes that are taking place, as well as our patient's metabolic demand. And so ultimately, when it comes to the management of these patients, that this is going to revolve around minimizing these secondary injuries, ultimately by increasing the cerebral oxygen delivery to the brain and decreasing the cerebral metabolic demand. All right, and with that said, that's going to wrap things up here. I hope this lesson was very beneficial to you guys. Like I said, this was a quick overview. Make sure you guys are keeping an eye out for those future lessons where we're going to go over some of the stuff more in depth here. Again, if you enjoyed this lesson, make sure and subscribe to the channel.
Thank you, Professor. Alright, so yeah, that was it for me. What are your thoughts on everything? What are your thoughts on anything? Put it down in the comments. Down in the comments. Down in the comments. Just thank you for watching. See ya.